So Karen, welcome. Welcome so much to the podcast. It's lovely to see you again.
It's great to be here, Juliet. Thank you very much.
So Karen, you're the owner of a recruitment agency, which sounds very bland. And I'm intentionally saying that because what piqued my interest about you when I saw you commenting and sharing posts on women in transport, sort of championing almost like that diversity piece. But then I discovered you did a lot more than that, and how you sort of came into the hiring industry and specialising in transport. So I'd love you to share a bit more, and I'm sure we're up for a good conversation today.
I'm looking forward to it, Juliet. So I think I've been a recruiter for 25 years, something like that. Throughout that period of time, I have fantasized about my exit on a fairly regular basis. But I kept on coming back to it. So I've recruited in the IT telecoms world. That was a very shaky time, Juliet, where I had many jobs in very quick succession. Then I was looking for stability. So I moved into recruiting into the public sector, specifically central government. And that was also very interesting. I like to see myself as quite an inquiring person. And so I enjoyed learning about central government and how it works, what it was about. And then in 2008, that's when the whole central government market went on some kind of freeze due to the coalition coming in. And one of my managing directors said, "Hey, Karen, what are you going to do to keep your job?" And I was kind of like, "Good question, Roger." And he said, "You can do transport." I was like, "Excellent, a male-dominated sector I know nothing about. Where do I start?" So I kind of, I think transport's quite a vast subject, Juliet. So I kind of like...
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, just had a look at a few contacts on our database and was adopted by some really interesting characters who understood that my strength wouldn't necessarily be my knowledge of transport, but my ability to recruit, which is a subject that's extremely close to my heart, the sector versus the skills. And many of them, took it upon themselves to either try me out or to introduce me to people in their network. And I learned so much. I ended up although I feel confident I could recruit in any transport sector or any sector as it happens, I ended up doing a lot of work in the rail and bus sector. So I set up a transport practice in my previous employer. Then I was headhunted and set up another transport practice. Fast forward to now, 5 years in, I'm running my own company. And when I started running my own company, which I cannot believe I've been running my own company for 5 years, but when I started running my own company, a lot of what I did was deliberate, but not deliberate at the same time. I was testing the water on a number of things. My need to be broad on sector is something that will never leave me. And so I did a lot of associate work for friends in startup recruitment companies, helping them with local government, central government, and not-for-profit recruitment. In the the real drive there was to be broad in my reach of networks and contacts, and my learning. So yeah. So that's kind of my recruitment journey in a very quick nutshell.
So what is it about transport, in particular the rail and bus sector that you talked about, that keeps you there? Because it said it piqued your interest, you started networking, but what is it that has kept you there for a long time?
That is a very good question. It's many things. So I've never met such a more sincere and committed bunch of people. I would also say, though, the recurrent theme is it needs to change. So if it needs to change, that's something that I get quite excited about. I think deep down, I have a very strong feminist vein, and the need to drive better numbers of underrepresented candidates in the sector is also a challenge. And I really think transport teams should be built of a mix of people from different sectors. And so sometimes I work all the time. I work really hard to challenge the need for sector. So that kind of piques my interest because it doesn't always happen.
Mm.
Whether I'm working on the process or not, it doesn't always happen. But if I can push that boundary successfully, because it doesn't always work successfully either, that really excites me, if I'm honest, to prove that people with different mindsets and different ideas can succeed, and can work closely with those from the transport sector who have been there through and through.
Mm. So are you saying that people don't need to understand it and be from that sector? They can transfer their skills into that and work along those teams of experts? Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that at any level. And most of the work I do is at the head of or the director MD level. And therefore, if you're going to lead a team, you need to take the trouble to understand that team, but you would do that in any environment, wouldn't you? So if you're from outside the sector, you might ask questions that they hadn't anticipated and get a deeper understanding than even they may have. Who knows?
So as I champion diversity, which is why I really like what you're trying to do and what you are doing. So where does that leave the rail and bus sector? Because it, on the outside, from the public sort of everyday person side, it's under huge scrutiny. And even I sort of hit the news again and discussion points last week as we might be going into an election, right? Lots of maybe nationalising the sector again. So does public interest and policy affect the industry?
Majorly. So it can actually make it appear really unattractive. So that's another layer. There's a lot of cynicism from other sectors, say those who work in the IT telecoms or energy, who feel the pace of change is too slow. And I think the links to politics make it really difficult. It's completely linked to politics. So at one point, they were looking at workforce reform. They still are.
Yeah.
They went to close the ticket offices. Suddenly, there's a U-turn on that. But all that work that led up to that bred quite an uncomfortable feeling in various pockets of the industry and frontline staff as well as MDs. And so, it's not helped by politics. And again, there's a chance it might stagnate as we go towards the election. Transport does seem to be a very busy sector, though, consistently. There are peaks and troughs, but it just tends to have quite a demand for decent resource.
Is that because they want that resource, or is it a general demand? Because there's a difference, isn't there? Do they want the change and want to attract those diverse thinkers and diverse minds, or is it because there is so much opportunity, so many vacancies that they need to fill those?
It's a mixture.
Okay.
I would say there's a huge appetite for change, and actually it's heading in an incredibly good direction. If you actually look at it, but it's just got a long way to go, and it's not as advanced as some other sectors. And so if you're trying to attract people, I think that's the thing that some of the clients, before they go out to market, need to think about: what's attractive and what are we asking somebody to come and do, and how are we going to support them to really thrive in our environment, rather than are we going to tick a box and get somebody from out of sector, because it's quite trendy these days.
So where does your part come in when you are talking about diverse hires and different skills?
I think, I spend a lot of time challenging the importance of sector, and that's not to dismiss sector, because I do believe the sector experience really has a value and a place, but it's just to be sure of the requirements. So to stress test it, and if they genuinely want somebody from our sector, because some people also are nervous about doing it, and they may not really have the appetite, And if they don't, I actually truly respect them because they know their limits and they know where they're at and where they're heading. And maybe they're not ready for that step. But if they truly are, then their behaviors in their entire process need to reflect that. So, at a really basic level, there's no point saying, yes, we're very open to candidates from outside of rail if every other word in your job specification is rail jargon, just on a basic level. Because I get many, many candidates go, you're approaching me. Yes, I'm approaching you. I don't work in the sector. Yes, I know you don't work in the sector. I do have an IQ of some level, and because they find it weird because when they read this job specification, there's a complete disconnect with me saying the client's open. It's quite a sales job I actually have to do, and so the clients I work for, I do say to them, we are partnering together on this search. And the outcome is dependent on you as well as on me and every other factor, politics and candidate appetite, amongst other things.
That's interesting about the job description. So for someone, I've rewritten job descriptions when I've walked into organisations because it feels very bureaucratic, overloaded, full of jargon, everything that you talked about. But you have to also champion that internally and make sure there isn't too much jargon, because someone that walks into that environment is suddenly faced with all this. They're going, there's quite a lot here. There's an education piece, isn't there, that needs to happen internally?
Completely. And it's, you can do anything. So there's a particular role I'm working on at the moment, and they have taken out the union piece. It's a head of role. And yet, traditionally, that head of in most organizations would be the lead on the union stuff.
Yeah.
Because there are so many capable people in that person's team, they are demonstrating, I'm really excited about this, they're demonstrating that they want a leader, not a union negotiator alone. They've also taken away the need to be chartered. And if a leader can lead people who are chartered. I'm not trying to be too controversial, but I think if you find, for me, I encourage my clients to hire on ability and attitude, because that's untrained. Well, maybe ability is trainable, but attitude is not trainable. If they're demonstrating traits that you really want in your organization and they're working at the right level, what can you do to accommodate them rather than what don't they have? So it's just flipping it to a value rather than a deficit.
Yeah, I love that.
So do I.
So where it makes so much sense to me. It's common sense, right?
Good.
I guess I don't know. It's difficult for some. So where does the women in transport fit in? Because you did a talk. Was it last week?
Yeah.
Was it the week before? You did a talk.
I did.
And you included in here about collaboration and skills. And so tell us more.
So last week, I stood up in front of 300 bus people, professionals, and suppliers, as well as operators, in a national industry event called Album. And actually, my talk followed was before Women in Transport, which I was so pleased about. Basically, the gist of it, and I was actually quite nervous because it's quite a traditional sector in many parts. The best thing about it was actually they were so warm and welcoming. It was hosted by Warrington's Own Buses, which is a small operation in Warrington that's gone fully electric. I spent the first night, I didn't go straight into it, the first night making sure I got to know as many people as I could, which is a good thing if you've never presented in front of lots of people before. And the next day I spent a bit of time quietly in my hotel, just getting ready. And I went up there and I kind of hit them with some quite, I don't think they were expecting me to stand up and reveal a number of facts about myself that cannot be seen. So I think the whole point of that was to try and encourage people to look beyond the basics in a candidate. I also encouraged them to own the entire process. I gave 2 case studies. So I tried to bring it to life. And I also tried to demonstrate that careers are not linear. So there's a number of things that people look for when they're hiring. I mean, if you look at things like age, in this ageist society we're working in, I think there's like practically, is it a 2-window optimum window when you're at your peak? I mean, especially if you're a female, before children, after children, during children.
Yeah.
So, from my perspective, I was just trying to open their minds a little bit, and block out any negative thoughts from my own mind about the fact that perhaps they may not welcome my message. I gave an example of 2 people. So one was an aviation professional that had wanted to work in the rail and bus sector for several years, but had got really bored of applying and being rejected on sector alone. In the end, he did land that role, despite the client wanting rail as their starting point, but with careful brokering between both parties, because candidates also get fatigued and cynical.
Yes,
that's the bit I'm often up against. Why are you asking me to, get into this process? I know the outcome. I'm not doing it. So did all that, and they got the job, and they're delighted, and both parties are, really reaping the benefit. The other one, hitting a bit harder, was about a single mother who has 3 children, and shares a childcare with her partner who's not very well, and can't just, drop in and look after children whenever it's required. She had a location change for her interview that was quite dramatic, and she didn't have enough time to prepare. She didn't get the role. She never got feedback from the recruiter until 2 weeks. There are studies by the CIPD that indicate that if a woman doesn't receive feedback, they're unlikely to reapply. But when they do get feedback, they improve their numbers of women reapplying at senior level by 27%. And actually, all genders then are prepared to tell people about how great the company is, if they get a phone call from a recruiter or a hiring manager. So, to be honest, to me, I think this is what I found weird about this presentation. It was basic common sense. And I was dreading the idea of having to make basic common sense sound interesting. But actually, by storytelling, I've learned a lot about presenting, and I would actually do it again. By storytelling, you really bring it to life. And one of my friends from Women in Transport had encouraged me to go down that route, and I'm really grateful. But we flowed into each other, which really helped. They're really committed. It was good, very good to be before them. Sorry, can't get my
fantastic.
Can I? Yeah.
Sounds
I
really
got a lot of energy from it, and I got a lot of good feedback. Yeah.
Good. Really positive. Really positive. So let's talk women in transport then. We allude to the fact that where the transport industry is going through huge change still, and transformation, and likely to do more of that. Let me ask you this, and it's a big question. What kind of future does the rail and bus sector have, or could it be?
Well, the first thing that comes into my mind, maybe not the best way to do things, but it's coming into my mind, is the strong links to the green agenda. That's the first thing I'd say. The fact that buses are going to be all fully electric at some point in the near future, the fact that rail clearly already is. I think it's heavily involved with connecting cities, especially up north. A lot of investment is going into it. So it's essential. It has a secure future, in my opinion. And then connecting the two, connecting all modes together so it flows better. So I don't think it's just going to be wiped out, regardless of whether it's national or not. And actually, if we do go fully national, we're just going back to where we were, hopefully, with a twist of positivity, because I don't think we'll go back to where we were. But it was nationalised, wasn't it? So you see this, you're getting more mature in your years when you start to see things.
It comes back round again.
Cycle. Yeah. It's mad. But I do think it's still progressing, because they're talking a lot about, information, about reaching as many different customers as they can through making clever hires. Because people do look to identify with people. Conductors, customer services people, sales, ticket office, all that kind of stuff. They do want to try and identify with people. Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard working on those services because the amount of abuse that I've seen some people get is just awful. Awful.
But again, rail and bus are so strong. They go into schools. I know that there are so many problems on, graffiti and destruction on tracks, on the vehicles, but they, a lot of people take it upon themselves to senior directors to go and speak to children at school. Because without these systems, the towns and the cities don't flourish. They're vital.
That's the reason they were put there, wasn't it? It's that connection between communities and work and everything else. And it's interesting, isn't it? And it's so much more. So what struck me when we were talking about that was it's much more than seeing the driver or having someone walk through a carriage, or, we used to get the old-fashioned, ticket people that come around and roll out the tickets. I don't think that happens anymore. But it's much more than that. You're talking about engineering, construction, IT, service.
Exactly. You're talking about extending networks. You're talking about quicker services. But on a basic level, for some people, it's the only interaction they're going to get that day. But also, it's deeply memorable. So sometimes they take for granted those that make them feel good, but they remember those that don't make them feel good very much. That's why you've got organizations like Transport Focus, which is there to champion the needs of the customer, put the customer first. Because rail and bus have been heavily criticized for seeing themselves as transporting people from A to B, passengers, not customers. So there's been that shift from passenger to customer, which they are doing well. They really are. They've got, the journey I had down to this event was seamless. Again, I do remember ones that don't work, but when I do have a bad journey, I do know, and I've seen just how hard they work to try and put it right. So I'm very unlikely. I would never criticize on an open forum because I don't think it's productive and I don't think it's helpful.
No, very true, very true. So why is diversity important in the sector?
To me, a sector without diversity doesn't innovate. So you need to reach as wide an audience as possible, number one, but also you need to come up with new ideas. So this conference was presenting to SME and smaller operators. The smaller operator, in theory, should have much more ownership about its destiny, be more agile, and be able to steer where it's going and capitalize in areas where the big private equity owned transport groups tend to be cutting back. That's what I think. I actually think there's a real opportunity. So if you hire people who can challenge your thinking in the right way, so don't latch on to the person that you hired that came in like a bull in a china shop and assume everyone's the same. So hire people with the right attitude from out of your sector, and they will actually work in harmony with your sector for better outputs. I really think organizations you never ever chuck out those who know how to run and to lead that service. You combine. I'm talking about combined approaches always.
Yeah, I like the word you use, combined. That's really interesting because it's tough right now. And you're talking about huge. Well, you're talking about systemic change that has to happen. So for individuals going in, they've got to be excited about change and transformation, all the stuff that you hear at Hearts and Minds and collaboration. But that piece that you talked about is fascinating. So if you're excited about that, would they go and work in? Is that a good place to work then?
Well, that's the whole point. If you are excited about that, you should go and work there. And you need to feel a chemistry but I would also say to clients, as I kind of tried to allude to, if you're not comfortable with an out of sector hire, don't do it. But also, out of sector hire purely in isolation probably won't give you the momentum you're looking for. So you probably need to make multiple hires for real value. And I think that's the key. But it's also the onboarding, working really closely with them to make sure that they can excel. It takes a lot of self-awareness to understand where your deficit as a hiring manager may lie.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, isn't it, between somebody who's progressive and understands they can't be responsible for everything in an organization and they rely on a team, to those who cannot work with other people and are quite dominant and think everyone should think like them.
Yeah. So women in transport, women in rail, women in bus. Does it have the same, I guess, drop off and pick up as sort of women in tech? Because we know that girls in schools fall out of those engineering technical studies quite early on, really early on, for whatever reason. It's not interesting, it's not creative, they don't understand, where do I fit in? I remember at school being with girls who loved the engineering side, but end up not going into that sector because, for whatever, lots of different reasons, they got put off. So is there a deficit? Is there a blocker there? Do we need to do more for girls coming through?
I think we do, but I'm not exaggerating to say that I've seen so many strong females in bus and in rail.
Brilliant.
Coming through. Okay, so some of them come through the apprentice route, but some of them come through as graduates. Well, there's a graduate apprentice now, but for each and every one of them, there will be a knock-on effect of more coming in, I would say, because they have networks and groups. But you also see, I'm very conscious of the male ally, because that's the bit that really frustrates me, is that people again hire what they see. So if we hire more females, we'll automatically get more females. Not necessarily. If you hire men who hire females, you probably stand a better chance.
Interesting. Yeah.
So in Women in Transport, we refer to male allies a lot, because actually we don't really want to alienate anyone, because I just think it's a mindset. You either want, I don't want to live in a world, Juliet, where diversity isn't even a word. But we're not anywhere near that. So we have to put things you have to label things. But that's the whole point. If you hire the right people, you could probably speed up your processes to a fairer, juster employee workplace just by hiring the right people.
So I'm recruiting more diverse hires into the industry. What are a few things where people succeed, what you see where people succeed once they're placed in those roles?
What do I see? I see really strong collaborators. I see people who are very self-aware and conscious that they have a lot to learn, but they want to learn. I see people who love working. I see people who sector hop a lot as well. They don't want to be labeled. They want to be defined by a sector. That I do understand all sorts of arguments. Sometimes certain skills. Sector is really key. But I also believe it's more the attitude. I really do believe that, and I'm happy to be criticized for thinking in that way, because I'm not somebody who grew up driving a train. So. I look when I hire people who are very happy to be challenged, but who are very happy to come back as well, and will come back stronger. And they don't alienate the people that they're working with. That's key to me to success or failure. Landing in your first 100 days in landing anywhere are really, really tricky. They can literally define the rest of your stay in an organization.
Mm.
So yeah. Do you know what, Julia? It's not easy. It is far
No,
from easy.
no.
And I also learn from the failures. I don't actually like using that word, but I learn from placements that haven't quite worked out, because it doesn't always work. And people don't always work out. So if we
But
don't learn
that's the
from
same in
them, that's
everything,
when we
isn't
fail.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the same in everything. I was thinking last night, because I was preparing for our chat today,
Yeah.
thinking, actually, I think there are 3 hires that I've made in my career that I were a big mistake.
Yeah.
Big mistake. But then you think small numbers out of the volume of the people that you've worked with is good. But actually, you learn from those.
You learn more.
But also all human. So you don't know everyone to the nth degree, and you make your best expertise, judgment, and knowledge and experience, and it works both ways, right?
It works both ways. And I've evolved as a small business owner, from being more open when I first started, to then understanding where I could actually add value and how I would work best and where my value was. So for me, I won't work non-retained work. So by doing retained work already, you are understanding which clients are really committed and serious about making a hire, to those who perhaps are scattergunning the market, or chancing their luck. Because even on a retained search, you may not end up with the hire, but what you will end up with is a whole host of market insight and market intelligence, because making that hire relies on the candidate and the client being completely aligned. And there's not much that will mitigate for things deviating from that. Yes, you can use assessment, but that's quite clinical, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, I argued the case for perhaps changing your assessment. When I was talking at that presentation, we're talking about neurodiverse candidates. Now people are much more aware of the differences that people and how they present. So somebody on certain spectrums will struggle with a time limited piece of work, and yet in the in a different environment, they'd probably excel. But we're weeding them out before they've even got to interview stage. I spoke to somebody the other day who basically had to go through lengthy assessments before they were even spoken to by the recruiter. So if she'd failed that, she wouldn't have even had a chance.
Yeah, I just feel like you're jumping hoops sometimes for the sake of it.
Yeah.
It's because you sort of put everyone in the same pot, but none of those assessments should be a yes or no. They should add, it's a point of discussion, isn't it? Particularly if people have got strong CVs or strong recommendations from people. Actually, it's the whole thing, not the singular. But anyway, won't digress on assessment tools.
You know what? For me, as a business owner, the secret to my success is saying no to some of my clients, because the memory again is always when it goes wrong. So I try and eliminate the risk to my business, because if I have a feeling that a client is just ticking a box and paying lip service to what's going to be potentially a 3-month process, I probably won't work with them. I will exercise my choice element.
Yeah. So you talked about the kind of future that transport could have, which, as a visual person, I can see all this beautiful image in my head. So what tips do you have for people who maybe are curious about the sector, don't have a background, fascinated by it, want to be part of that change and transformation that's so needed and is desired right now? What 1 or 2 tips do you have for those people? Get in contact with you first has to be the number one.
I was I think, you know what? I think one of the things you should do, really, if you're interested in working in transport, is try and see who in your network already is, and tell get them to tell you the positives and the negatives, about what they're experiencing, and how did they get into transport. They are they're training up drivers. If you want to be a driver, it's a good wage as well. So I think don't make assumptions that it's not right for you till you've really explored it. And look at, it depends on your sector. I mean, you can transfer across. Of course you can. Be positive about it. But understand why. Why do you want to work in transport? Because the people that work in transport, many of them really are passionate about delivering a good experience. And if you can connect with them on that level, they'll understand you and welcome you
And
into.
is that a good experience for the customer that you talked about?
A good experience for the customer, as broad a customer as possible, because the customer's changing. So in rail you have a lot of leisure customers, because a lot of people now, of course you do have commuters, but it's shifted. It's not all about the commuter anymore, definitely not. And there's a lot of accommodating, mothers and parents, and anyway, you know what I mean, who are traveling.
That's good. Yeah. So people from that space. So can you share with me some links for women in transport and sort of key places where people can go and go, there are people like you that are changing the norm and championing that diversity piece in the wider transport area?
So women in transport are doing lots of great work. There's now a division called Women in Bus and Coach, which is a separate organisation focusing purely on bus and coach. There's also a Women in Rail. They're all really great organisations and worth to look at. I'm also an ambassador to a company called Radical Recruit that helps disadvantaged people into work.
Fantastic.
And for me, the idea there is to help my transport clients to populate some of their jobs for drivers and customer experience people with people who are keen to get back into the workplace.
I love that, Karen. Just share what Radical Recruit is, who they are for people who don't know.
Like a social movement, it's a charity basically, and they don't just place people. It's a complete end-to-end service. So you could be cold, hungry, and recovering from an addiction. So they will help you with your shopping. They will help you to find the right outfit to go to your interview. They will coach you. And when they place you, they will check in on you to make sure that you're actually doing okay. Because when a radical gets placed, again, it's not a linear, they're not suddenly become the MD of an organization. They might do, but they will fall over and there will be bumps. And actually, that's when you really need to pick people up and help them to have faith in themselves, so that you give them every opportunity to succeed. To be able to earn money is like a fundamental right, isn't it?
Well, it's fundamental to life, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think bills.
They don't understand when they walk past somebody who's homeless. They don't see the story behind the person. They see somebody who wants to be there. Really? So I think I'm really glad I found Radical, but Radical also keeps me on my toes. I'm not the world's leading expert on diversity. I'm doing my best, and I need to be educated. And through Radical and through my links to Women in Transport, Women in Bus and Coach, Women in Rail, all these kind of people keep me on my toes and question whether I'm actually doing enough. So
thank you. That was brilliant, and a brilliant close to our conversation. Thank you so much, Karen. I love that.
And to meet you.
We will absolutely share the links so people can find out more, become an ambassador of Radical Recruit, and more. So thank you very much. It's a brilliant conversation.
Okay, bye.